For more than 500 years, the West didn't just influence the world, it defined the rules, controlled the money, shaped the institution, and decided what powers look like. But today, something historic is happening, not a sudden collapse, not a dramatic headline, but a slow, measurable shift where Western dominance is no longer automatic, no longer unquestioned, and no longer uncontested. The real story isn't that the West is weak, it's that the rest of the world is rising. So make sure you save this, stay with me till the end, and let's get started. It began with the Oswald Spengler, the German thinker who published The Decline of the West in 1980, right after World War I. Spengler argued that civilization rise and fall like living beings, like growth, peak, and decline. He believed that the West had entered a phase where unity, creativity, and moral strength weaken, while rigid system, power, politics, and material interests take over. Now, history did not immediately prove him right because after World War II, the United States rose as a global superpower. But Spengler's point, still matters. Decline doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like winning today but losing the long game. So, to understand the long game, we need to go further back into history. For most of the human history, the world was not ruled by the West. Asia, especially China and India, had a strong economies long before Europe. Even about 300 years ago, the average person in China lived slightly better than the average person in North America. For a long time, power and wealth were not centered in West. After the 1500 AD, something important happened. The West began to grow faster than any society before. Historians call this period as the Great Divergence. This was a time when Western Europe and later United States moved ahead in money, science, military power, health, technology, and global influence. As the year passed, the gap becomes very large. By 1978, the average American earned 22 times more than the average Chinese person. In 1960s, people in China lived on average into their early 40s, while in the United States, life expectancy already reached 70 years. These numbers show how big the difference had come. At their peak, Western empires controlled nearly three-fifths of the world's land and population, and they produce almost three-quarters of the world's total economic output. This level of power was not small, it played a major role in shaping the modern world. After World War II ended in 1945, the global balance of power changed completely, and the United States moved from isolation to the global leadership. Before the war, many Americans wanted to stay out of the world politics, but Europe was wrecked, old empire was falling, and the new threats were rising. By the end of the war, the US and the Soviet Union became the two strongest powers, launching the Cold War. The US used its economic strength to shape a new world order, and it leads the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, created the IMF and the World Bank, and making the US dollar the center of global financial system. In 1945, America helped establish the United Nations, becoming one of its most powerful members. Through the Marshall Plan, the US invested over 13 billion US dollars to rebuild Western Europe, reviving economies, protecting capitalism, and blocking communist influence. At the same time, the US rebuilt Japan, reconstructed its economy, and helped it return as major industrial power, especially after the Korean War. By 1950s, America produced more than half of the world's manufacturing goods, held most of the world gold, dominated global trade, and shaped international institutions. That's why people call it the start of the American century. The Cold War officially ran from around 1947 to 1991, shaping wars, alliances, and economic system. The world split into two blocks, and many regional conflicts, become a part of this US-Soviet rivalry. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Cold War ended, the United States became the world's only superpower. A unipolar world order was born. For nearly a decade, America dominated global politics, military power, finance, technology, and culture. But after 2000, the unipolar moment began to fade. China rose fast, Russia returned, and regional powers start pushing back. This marked a shift toward a multipolar world where power is no longer controlled by one country. In other words, my friend, the West didn't fall off a cliff, the other climbed up the mountain. For a decade, the West controlled global politics, trade, and security through the liberal international order based on democracy, human rights, and international rules. Today, the world is changing fast. The West is still important, but its dominance is shrinking. and powers is shifting especially toward Asia. This is why many experts say Western leadership is weaker than before. The key idea is relative power, like the West may still be strong, but others are rising. This is visible in the economy. In 2016, Asia held 31.8, Europe 16.8, and United States 15.6. That alone shows global production is moving away from the West. Financial power follows the same trend. Investment is increasingly flowing toward Asia, Africa, and the Middle East and South America. Countries like India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Mexico, and Nigeria are expected to drive future growth. So Western economic dominance will, keep declining, not because the West becomes poor, but because the other becomes major player. As the saying goes, the world doesn't stay still. Now, add a demographic and security changes. Europe and North America faces aging population and shrinking workforces, while Asia and Africa remain young and fast growing. That affects long-term productivity and growth. Militarily, the United States remains the strongest power, but its share of global military spending is falling, while China defense spending has risen sharply, challenging the Western influence, especially in Asia. And modern threats like cyber warfare, terrorism, pandemics, climate change, political interference are harder to control and cross borders. Traditional power is less effective against these threats. On top of that, internal division, protectionism, and weaker unity inside the West reduce its leadership ability. You have to clear your concept, my friends, that the world is moving toward a more multipolar system where power is spreading across many centers. So, as you know, Western dominance is declining and power is spreading. If we connect that to the economic change and political choices like trade wars, weaker alliance, and nationalism inside the Western countries, at the same time, countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are more confident and independent. This change is visible in numbers. Asia produced 57% of global economic growth between 2015 to 2021 and now holds 42% of the world GDP, along with more than half of the global trade. That's huge because economic strength is the foundation of the global power. And also many countries avoid choosing sides. They trade with China while keeping security ties with the United States. New groups like BRICS and regional organizations are gaining influence, while Western lead groups like the G7 feel less central. This doesn't mean that the West is finished, it means the West is no longer the only boss in the room. And here's where it gets interesting. Global financial and political systems are increasingly emerging outside of Western control. Groups like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO) are building alternative institutions such as the BRICS Development Bank and proposals like SCO Development Bank to finance development and reduce dependence on Western lead system. There is also a growing push for de-dollarization where countries trade in local currencies instead of the US dollar, slowly changing how global trade works. The report also linked declining trust in the US leadership to long military intervention, trade wars, policy contradiction, and withdrawal from agreement, pushing countries to pursue independent paths. This is why some analysts say the West is not collapsing, but its dominance is becoming less automatic and less accepted. Now let's connect that to big economic shift. After 2008, since 2008 financial crisis, the share of the world GDP held by the United States and Europe has fallen. In 1980s, they controlled over 60% of the global GDP, but today it has dropped below 45%. Meanwhile, Asia's share has risen quickly. China's global GDP share rose from about 2% to nearly 18 to 19%, becoming the world's second largest economy. Asian economies have grown faster than Western economies. The West is still rich, but the gap is, closing faster. The manufacturing story make it even clear. China now produces over 30% of the global manufacturing output, while the US share has fallen below 16%. A lot of Western industry moved to Asia for lower cost, which contribute to deindustrialization, job losses, and higher debt in Western countries. Now look at the ranking. In 1980s, the top economies were dominated by West and its ally. The US economy was about 2.9 trillion, while China was around $300 billion. But by 2025, the US is around $30 trillion and China is close to $19 trillion and India is near $4 trillion, overtaking the UK and France. Between 1980 and 2025, China's economy expanded more than 60 times, while most Western economies grew only a 5 to 10 times. Japan slipped from second to fourth, and European economies fell in ranking. That is the economic shift in one clean comparison. Europe also faces added pressure from the conflict and energy shock. The Ukraine war, trade disputes, and rising tension pushed energy prices up, disrupted supply chain, and increased production costs. Foreign investment, cross border trade, capital flows, and labor mobility declined, slowing growth and productivity. European governments are spending more on defense and energy subsidies, increasing public debt. Companies are also spending more to secure supply chains, raising costs and lowering profit. Together, these factors weaken Europe's competitiveness over time. Now let's talk about the United States, because here's the question. Many people ask, if America is still powerful, why do we keep hearing "Make America Great Again"? One report explained that despite strong military and economic and technological power, America's global influence faces serious challenges. Ongoing conflict like Ukraine and Gaza, rising tension, and growing criticism of the US foreign policy shows that Washington struggles to control outcomes. Rising national debt, deep political division, and pressure on the middle class weakens America internally. Support for the controversial military action has increased global anger and reduced trust in US leadership, hurting America's image. The same report points to polarization, racial tension, inequality, rising debt, and weaker ethical leadership as an issue, damaging credibility at home and abroad. The US still leads in technology, innovation, research, and higher education, but internal division and foreign policy controversies limit leadership. Another report explained that even if the US economy grows around 2%, many problems create uncertainty. Inflation, near 3% keeps daily cost high, food, rent and fuel, healthcare. So people don't feel relief. Interest rates stay high, making loans, mortgages and investment expensive. Inequality increases, the job market faces stress from layoff, workers shortages linked to immigration limits, and job replacement by automation and AI. High living cost, expensive credit, job uncertainty, and technological disruption create long term risk. Now, before we move ahead, there is one more angle. What is happening inside societies, not just in charts? At the same time, much of the East and Middle East is focusing on long term development like investing in infrastructure, technology, clean energy, education, and modern cities and future industries. Countries like China, the UAE, and the Saudi Arabia are shaping their economies through large projects and long term planning. This contrast matters because while the West is managing crisis after crisis, the East is building long term capacity. That's one reason global influence is shifting toward Asia and emerging economies. If I say in simple words, I would say that they are building while the other are busy arguing. And there is also a wider social and environmental angle. According to the permaculture apprentice, the Western decline is not only about economics or geopolitics, it includes political division, migration pressure, environmental damage, rising debt, job losses from automation, and climate change. The idea is that when these pressures combine, they weaken social stability and resilience internally. So the challenges are not only about money and power, but also about how societies adopt and handle stress. The world is not ending, but the era of the West decides everything. If you understand that early, you are ahead of most people. Please like, share and comment this video and subscribe my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.